Thanks a lot, Dr. Bibek Debroy, to join us over Skype for this interview. It's a pleasure to have interacted with you over Twitter, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to introduce some of our social media friends and other people on the internet with some of your excellent work, especially in the field of Indian epics. Brief introduction: have worked with the Finance Ministry, Government of India. Also worked with the UNDP for legal reforms in India. You're also consulting editor to quite a number of Indian financial newspapers and visiting faculty to the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, Presidency College, as well as the National Council for Applied Economics. Where does the Indian epic part, especially translating difficult Sanskrit text and creating the current 10-volume version of Mahabharata that you're writing, where does this fit in?
Oh, well, it's not as if it's happened overnight suddenly. I've been doing this for years and years. And originally it started with a research kind of interest in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And I happened to work for some time at the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics in Pune. And those who know about Pune will know that right next to the Gokhale Institute is the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute.
Right.
And because it was geographically so close, I used to frequent the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute. And at one point, with a great deal of trepidation, despite being an economist, I submitted a paper to the Annals of the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, which was on weapons used in the Kurukshetra war. To my great surprise, it was published after due refereeing, and that sort of enthused me. Then in 1989, I brought out a book, which was a research-based book on the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. It was called Some Aspects of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. There were about 12 essays, 6 of which were on the Ramayana, 6 were on the Mahabharata. It received very good reviews, but sunk without a trace. Having done this on the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, I thought I should now read the Puranas. When I began to read the Puranas, I realized that Motilal Banarsi Das had not quite started by then. I realized that there were no good unabridged translations of the Puranas available, not even abridged ones. So I began, initially I started off with the idea of actually reading them. And then I realized because there were no decent translations, there was a market, or at least the publisher thought there was a market for translating them. So abridged translations were done of the Puranas, the Vedas and the Upanishads. So in some sense that's how it all started. It became a bit more serious. The interest in Sanskrit became a bit more serious much later, particularly after I translated the Bhagavad Gita, and then I began this exercise of translating the Mahabharata. So as I said, it's not as if it's happened overnight. It happened incrementally over a period of time.
Okay. So did you also then formally train in Sanskrit?
Oh no, none whatsoever. I have no formal training in Sanskrit, never ever. So it's all been learning by doing, except it's learning over several years, and therefore, as always happens, when you pick up a language in this unstructured and informal kind of way, my reading skills are far better than my conversational skills. For example, if we were to be doing this interview in Sanskrit, I might be able to do it, but I'll have to struggle a little bit. So my reading skills are far better than my conversational skills.
So tell us more about your about the 10-volume Mahabharata that you're writing. I think 4 or 5 parts are already done and are available in the market, in the shops.
You see, the reason I decided to do that is quite often when I tell people that I'm doing this, people are very surprised and they say, but surely there must be plenty of translations of the Mahabharata available. And the answer is actually no, because firstly we are talking about the English language. And the reason I'm flagging this is a lot of people these days, particularly the younger generation, they are much more comfortable with the English language. So therefore it is important to render translations in English as opposed to the vernacular.
Right.
And quite often people are surprised. They don't realize that what you see of the Mahabharata floating around in English, those are abridged translations. They are not unabridged translations. There have actually been just 2.5 unabridged translations of the Mahabharata in English. The two that were completed were done by two Bengalis in the 19th century. The first one was Kishori Mohan Ganguly and the second one was Manmathanath Datta.
Yeah.
So I guess being a Bengali and more importantly being a non-Brahmin singularly qualifies me to translate the Mahabharata. The half, of course, was Van Buitenen at the University of Chicago who started it and sort of unfortunately died halfway before it was complete. So there is a vacuum. It is not as if, it's not quite the case that there are plenty of translations floating around. And as an Indian, I sometimes feel that the criticism of Westerners saying that they don't understand the nuances, they don't get things right, it may be valid, but it is valid only up to a point, because if we are so very unhappy with what the Westerners are doing, what are we doing as Indians to rectify the damage, if that is the word to use? So initially I had to think really hard about whether I should embark on this hazardous journey, because it seemed to stretch to infinity. Yeah. Because as you said, there are 10 volumes stretching into about 2 million words, roughly about 200,000 words a volume. Wow. Right now, 6 volumes have come out. Okay. The 7th volume is over and done with so far as I am concerned, meaning it's with Penguin, so it should be out next month sometime, well, in May sometime. And therefore, I'm sort of 70% done. I am working on the 8th volume right now. Just to sort of factually keep it correct, the 10th volume edition is of the main Mahabharata. Okay. There will be a companion 11th volume which will be of the Harivangsha, which I decided also to do, although it is partly part of the Mahabharata, partly it's not part of the Mahabharata. And also I should say that I've almost agreed, and Penguin has agreed, that after this I'm going to do the Valmiki Ramayana.
Okay, that's quite a task. You mentioned that there are quite a bit of Mahabharatas floating around in the market, and you correctly said that they are abridged versions, and some of them are interpretations also. So a lot of academics have tried to interpret the Mahabharata into different contexts. What is your take on that? So these abridged versions, first of all, are they dealing with the subject matter directly, or are they interpretations?
Well, there's a little bit of both. But firstly, you must realize that there's a core Mahabharata story, which is the story of the war of Kurukshetra, the battle between the Kauravas and the Pandavas. But if you read the Mahabharata, there is a lot more to it than that. Yeah. Whenever I am doing an unabridged translation, I am indulging in selectivity. And selectivity by its very nature has a little bit of subjectivity. So almost automatically, I am missing out on some of the nuance, even if I'm trying to do translating and I'm not necessarily trying to do interpretation. And indeed, there have been retellings which have been done from the point of view of particular protagonists, be it Karna or be it Draupadi or be it someone else. But even for the straightforward translations, the moment it is abridged,
I'm sorry for the disconnection. We are back online. Just wanted to ask you to continue from where you left off. You were mentioning that in the process of interpretation, some elements are missed out. Please continue from there.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to do is to give a straightforward translation. Now, if I give a straightforward translation, quite often it may be the case that a straightforward translation will not necessarily make sense always to the reader, because a certain word is used in a certain context. And that context, it may not happen in 80% of the cases, but in 20% of the cases it may happen. So you need notes. In my particular case, it is footnotes to explain. Okay. Now, what is important to me is to carefully separate out the translation from the footnotes. So if you as a reader, you are reading it, you will figure out that, look, there is a little bit of interpretation here in the notes. Right. There is no interpretation in the text. And that is where I think that I've been extremely careful. So if it says Kaunteya, I will retain it as Kaunteya.
Right.
I will not change it to Arjuna.
Correct.
If necessary, I will give you a footnote saying that, hey, this is Arjuna.
Yes.
Whereas many other translators, because it is obvious that Kaunteya means Arjuna, in the translation they would say Arjuna. I have been extremely careful, or so I think, in those terms to separate out the translation from the interpretation. Now, once I have done all of this translation, then maybe someday I might want to do a little bit of explorative research on the translation. But that's not what I'm doing right now.
Yes, in some cases where Arjuna is mentioned as Kaunteya or in any other name, is there a specific context or a reason for him to be referred in that name, in that way?
Not always, but I think in most cases the reason it happens is, again, something that people sometimes don't realize is the Mahabharata is also poetry. It is not in prose, it's in poetry. Now, Sanskrit poetry had a very, very rigid metrical structure. It was pretty loose. Sanskrit as a language is pretty loose in terms of where the subject has to be, where the verb has to be. You can put the subject wherever you want, the verb wherever you want. But in terms of the metrical structure of the poetry, it was very, very tight. So if I use the word Kaunteya as opposed to the use Partha, I am using the word Kaunteya because it satisfies the requirements of the meter, whereas Partha would be appropriate in some other context. Okay. So I think the main reason for using these words was to preserve the metrical structure.